You might think living in a castle meant luxury, feasts, roaring fires, and the laughter of noble lords echoing through golden halls. But step closer, listen carefully. The wind howls through cracks in the stone, and the walls themselves breathe with the chill of centuries. Tonight, you'll discover why surviving even a single day inside a medieval castle might be harder than you ever imagined. So, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's travel back in time before we begin. If you enjoy calm storytelling about forgotten times, make sure to subscribe and keep the fire of history burning softly in your sleep. Now, let's begin our quiet journey into the heart of the castle. The year was 1319. At the edge of a misty valley, high above the forest of Aldemir, stood Castle Blackthorn, a fortress of grey stone that had guarded the realm for nearly 200 years. From a distance, it looked eternal, strong, and proud. But inside, life was far from comfortable. The sun rose slowly that morning, spilling pale light through the narrow arrow slits. The castle walls absorbed none of its warmth. The cold lived here, not just in the air, but in the very bones of the building. Every breath you took turned to mist. Every touch against stone bit back with frost. Servants had already begun their quiet chores. The sound of wooden buckets clattering echoed through the courtyard as water froze at the edges. The kitchens below tried to stir to life, iron pots, firewood, and the dull clang of metal. But even the flames seemed to burn reluctantly, struggling against the morning chill. Above, in the eastern tower, Sir Roland awoke. His chamber was grand only by name, a rough wooden bed. A single torch burned low, and a small window that let in more wind than light. His armor hung by the wall, glinting faintly in the dim glow. He sat up slowly, stretching his arms and feeling the stiffness of a soldier who'd slept little. Nights, people believed, lived with comfort and glory, but Sir Roland knew better. The cold was his truest enemy. It crept through every crack, it numbed his fingers, and it whispered through the corridors at night like a ghost. He poured water from a jug. It was half frozen. Washing his face was like pressing ice against his skin. Still, he smiled faintly. "Another day begins," he muttered, his voice echoing off the bare walls. Down in the courtyard, squires hurried to prepare the horses. The smell of hay mixed with damp stone. Their laughter was soft, half-hearted. Most of them had barely slept. The wind had howled all night, rattling doors and shaking shutters. From the battlements, a bell rang. It wasn't tea, a call to war, just a signal that morning prayers were about to begin. The chapel, lit by weak sunlight, was the only warm place in the fortress, not because of fire, but because it was filled with hope. Inside, the voices of knights and servants merged into a low hum of prayer. Some prayed for courage, others for mercy. Roland stood in silence, his thoughts elsewhere. He had fought wars, seen death, and bled for his king, but it was the silence of these mornings that truly tested him. When the prayers ended, he walked through the main hall. Tapestries hung from the walls, faded and frayed. They told stories of past victories, of kings who once ruled these lands. But the air smelled of damp and smoke, a reminder that glory was never as beautiful as it seemed. He stopped before a window and looked outside. Beyond the walls, the valley stretched endlessly, gray, silent, waiting. Somewhere far below, a stream glimmered faintly like a ribbon of glass. For a moment, Roland wondered what it would be like to live there, free from the cold stone and endless duty. But a knight belonged to his castle, and a castle, in return, demanded everything: warmth, comfort, sleep, and sometimes even sanity. As the day moved forward, life inside the fortress stirred. The smith's hammer began to ring again. The smell of baking bread reached the upper halls. Yet, beneath all this life, the castle remained cold, watching, listening, because within these walls, secrets slept, and some of them were beginning to wake. Roland paused as he heard something faint, a whisper, a sigh, or maybe just the wind snaking through the cracks of the tower. He turned his head toward the stairwell, but it was empty. Still, that sound lingered, soft and deliberate, like someone breathing just beyond the shadows. The knight stood motionless, his heartbeat echoing against the stone. Then, slowly, he reached for his sword. "Strange," he whispered, "it's barely dawn, and the castle's already awake." The cold walls of dawn were only the beginning. The morning bell rang through the stone corridors, its sound deep and heavy, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. The castle was awake again. Mist hung low in the courtyard. Thin sunlight, pale as candle wax, slipped between the battlements. The cold was sharper than steel, and even the crows seemed too tired to caw. Sir Roland drew in a breath that stung his chest. He'd slept little. The whispers from the night before had followed him into his dreams, soft and unbroken, like waves against rock. But duty demanded motion. In Castle Blackthorn, no one lingered too long with their thoughts. He stepped out from his small chamber and followed the narrow hallway to the great hall where the morning meal was served. The air smelled faintly of smoke, salted meat, and the damp of stone. A dozen servants moved in silence, carrying wooden trays with coarse bread and watery broth. At the center of the room, standing beside the fire pit, was the keeper, an old man wrapped in a heavy wool cloak. His shoulders stooped, but his presence commanding. Everyone in the castle knew him. Few knew his name. He had been here longer than any knight, any servant, even longer than the lord who claimed the castle now. His eyes were pale and sharp, like moonlight on ice. "Sir Roland," the keeper said without looking up, his voice a calm rasp. "You're awake early." Roland bowed slightly. "The walls keep me so, my lord keeper." The old man turned, his expression unreadable. "The walls keep all of us." He motioned for a servant to refill Roland's cup with thin ale. "Eat quickly. There's much to be done before nightfall." Outside, the castle's rhythm began, the steady beat of iron, the dull thud of wood, the low hum of life in a place too old to change. Roland walked through the inner courtyard, boots crunching against the frost. Blacksmiths hammered blades that no war would ever see. Stable boys brushed down horses that hadn't ridden beyond the gates in years. Everything was routine, predictable, safe. Yet everything also felt slightly wrong. The air carried a strange echo, as if voices lingered behind every sound, hidden within the rhythm of daily labor. Near the chapel, Roland stopped to watch two servants scrubbing the stone steps. One of them, a thin boy with red hair, looked up and whispered, "Don't go below, Sir Knight. The dark place hums louder after dawn." Roland frowned. "What place?" The boy looked away quickly, dipping his cloth back into the icy water. "Ask the keeper," he said softly. "He knows." By noon, the sun was no higher than a torchlight in fog. Roland found the keeper standing in the armory, overseeing the polishing of rusted swords. "You've been here for many winters," Roland said quietly. "Tell me, do you ever hear the walls speak?" The keeper paused, his hand resting on the hilt of an old blade. His eyes drifted toward the ceiling, as though listening to something only he could hear. "Every stone in this castle remembers," he said at last. "They carry the weight of oaths and blood. The noise you hear is the sound of memory, restless and waiting." Roland's brow furrowed. Waiting for what? The keeper turned to face him fully, his eyes narrowing. For someone to listen. Afternoon faded into a dim gray light that seemed to thicken the air. The castle's torches were lit early. Shadows moved along the walls like liquid smoke. Roland passed through the kitchen, a narrow room of steam, heat, and sharp scents. Cookmaids whispered as he passed. They spoke of footsteps in the cellar, of spoons rattling when no one moved them, of laughter behind closed doors. He ignored them at first, but something in the way they avoided his gaze unsettled him. When he stepped outside again, he saw the keeper watching from the balcony above, still, silent, his cloak billowing faintly in the wind. For the first time, Roland wondered if the old man ever slept. That evening, as darkness filled every corner, the routine continued. Supper, prayers, silence. The long table in the hall stretched like a shadow itself. Bowls clattered softly, and the fire burned low. Servants moved quietly, their faces pale in the flickering light. The keeper sat at the head of the table, unmoving, staring into the flames. Roland sat 3 seats away, watching him. It felt less like a meal and more like a ritual. "Do you ever leave the castle?" Roland asked, breaking the silence. The keeper did not look up. "I am the castle," he said simply. His voice carried an odd tone, not pride, but surrender. Then he added, almost as a whisper, "It keeps me as I keep it." Later that night, Roland returned to his chamber. The candlelight flickered against the damp walls. The air smelled faintly of iron and something older. He sat on the edge of his bed, removing his boots, when he noticed it, a faint mark scratched into the wood of his door. At first, he thought it was a trick of light, but as he leaned closer, he saw it clearly, a rough carving of the blackthorn sigil, the same symbol he had seen on the iron door beneath the chapel the night before. His pulse quickened. He ran his fingers over it, cold, sharp, deliberate. The cut was fresh. Roland opened the door quickly and looked into the hallway, empty, silent. Only the soft drip of water from the ceiling. But down the corridor, where the torchlight faded, he thought he saw a figure, tall, wrapped in gray cloth, unmoving. He called out, "Who goes there?" The figure didn't move. Then, slowly, it turned, not with motion, but like a shadow bending toward light. Roland's breath caught in his throat. The corridor went dark, and from the silence, a voice he recognized, old, calm, and distant, whispered, "Do not fear the sound, Sir Roland. Fear what silence hides," the voice of the keeper. But when Roland lit his candle again and looked down the hall, there was nothing. Only the mark on his door and the faint echo of the old man's words, repeating, softer now, like a lullaby trapped within the walls. The walls remember what we forget. The wind changed that night. It slipped through the arrow slits and narrow windows, carrying with it the scent of rain and something older, something like dust and memory. Sir Roland woke before dawn again. His candle had burned itself to nothing, but the room was not dark. A faint bluish light pressed through the cracks in the door, pale and trembling. He rose slowly, his joints stiff from cold. The mark on his door, the blackthorn sigil, caught the dim light, almost glimmering. For a long time he stood and listened. The castle was breathing. He could hear it, soft, uneven, like a sleeper turning in restless dreams. He stepped into the corridor. The torches had all gone out, but the air still held warmth, as if someone had just passed. "Who's there?" he said, softly. His voice sounded strange, swallowed by the stone around him. No answer came, only a sound, a low murmur, like distant voices carried by wind. It wasn't clear, not words exactly, more like half-formed thoughts. They rose and fell, whispering along the corridor, fading into the corners of the walls. He followed the sound. The deeper he walked, the colder it became. His boots echoed softly, slow, deliberate steps, until even that rhythm began to sound like someone walking just behind him. He turned, suddenly. Nothing, only torch brackets, long cold, the faint smell of oil, and stone slick with moisture. He moved toward the grand staircase. The great hall below was dark, but moonlight from the high windows spilled down like pale water. The sound grew clearer now, not just whispers, but voices in low conversation. He could almost make out phrases. "It's too soon. He remembers. The bloodline." Then silence again. Roland's hand tightened on his sword hilt, though he knew steel was useless against whatever stirred here. As he descended the stairs, he saw movement near the chapel door, a shadow crossing where no torch burned. He paused. The chapel was forbidden after dark. Even the priests avoided it once the sun fell. Still, something drew him closer. The wooden door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was heavy and cold. The scent of wax and old incense filled his lungs. Rows of benches stretched toward a stone altar draped in torn cloth. Above it hung a faded tapestry, a knight kneeling before a tree of thorns. Roland's gaze drifted to the floor. The stone was cracked, and from between those cracks came the faintest sound, like whispers rising from beneath the ground. He knelt and placed his palm on the stone. It trembled faintly, as though something moved deep below. He whispered, "Who's there?" The answer came not in words, but in breath, cold and long, brushing past his ear. "We wait." Roland stumbled backward, his heart hammering, though the air felt strangely still. The whisper had felt close, closer than sound. He lifted his eyes to the tapestry. It was moving, just a small sway, as though touched by wind. But there was no wind here. He stepped forward slowly and pulled the edge of the cloth aside. Behind it was stone, but not plain stone. A seam, narrow and almost hidden, a line where wall met door. Roland pressed his hand against it. It was warm. By morning, the castle returned to its rhythm, as though nothing had changed. The courtyard filled again with workers and smoke. The clatter of buckets, the ring of metal, the steady hum of daily labor. But Roland felt the air heavier than before. The castle's breath had deepened. Its silence had grown teeth. At breakfast, he sat at the long table, watching the others. No one looked at him. No one spoke to him. Only the keeper seemed aware. The old man's eyes flicked toward Roland once, briefly, knowingly, and then returned to his plate. Roland waited until the meal ended. When the hall emptied, he approached the keeper quietly. "What lies beneath the chapel?" he asked. For a moment, his expression softened, something like sorrow or regret. "There are places," he said finally, "that were built before the castle had walls, before the stone knew its name." Roland frowned. "You speak in riddles." The keeper looked at him then, and for the first time there was fear in the old man's eyes. "I speak plainly, Sir Knight. "Don't go below the chapel." Then he turned and walked away. That night the whispering began again, louder, closer. Roland lay awake, eyes open, the faint glow of moonlight tracing the shape of the mark on his door. The voices rose like a tide, layers of sound upon sound, merging into one slow chant that seemed to circle him. He stood, heart steady but curious now. He took his candle, stepped into the corridor, and followed the sound back through the passageways, past the grand staircase, toward the chapel again. The door stood half open, though he remembered closing it. The tapestry still hung there, moving ever so slightly, as though breathing. He approached it slowly, holding the candle high. The flame wavered, dimming in the cold air. The whispering stopped. Then, just as he reached for the tapestry, the candle flickered out. Darkness. Total, unmoving. And from behind the tapestry came the sound of something shifting. A long, dragging scrape of metal against stone. Then silence again. Roland waited. His breath slowed. His eyes adjusted to the faint light spilling from the window. The tapestry had moved again, only this time enough to show what lay behind it. A small iron handle, rusted but real. He placed his hand upon it. The metal felt warm, like skin. He hesitated, then pulled. The hidden door opened with a long sigh, as though the castle itself exhaled after centuries of holding its breath. A stairway descended into blackness. The whisper returned, soft, distant, almost relieved. "Come see." Roland stepped forward, 1 foot into the dark. The door closed behind him, and the sound of the castle's breathing faded into silence. The air was colder now. The stairway coiled downward like a stone serpent, vanishing into a depth where no torchlight could reach. Sir Roland's footsteps echoed softly against the curved walls, a rhythm both steady and uncertain. Each step whispered, each sound lingered longer than it should, as if the castle itself listened. He carried a single candle's flame trembling, throwing pale light upon carvings etched into the wall, ancient runes almost erased by time. Some resembled swords, others eyes, and a few blackthorn branches twisted into a circle. He traced one with his glove. The stone was warm again, pulsing faintly beneath his touch, like the slow heartbeat of something asleep. The passage opened into a small chamber, its ceiling low and uneven. Dust floated in the air like drifting snow. In the center stood an old stone table, carved from the same gray rock as the castle's foundation. Upon it lay objects half buried in age-broken candles, pieces of rusted armor, a wooden cup turned dark from centuries of damp. Roland set his candle down and looked closer. Faint writing covered the table's surface, names and dates, each cut deep by trembling hands. He read the first few aloud. Alaric, 1072. Go on, 1129. Then his eyes caught one name fresher than the rest. Roland, his own. The candle flickered violently, as if disturbed by a sudden gust, though no wind touched the chamber. He stepped back, heart calm but heavy. He did not believe in omens, yet the weight of centuries pressed upon him here. This place was not meant for the living. A sound broke the silences, slow dripping, steady and deliberate. He turned toward it. At the far end of the chamber, a narrow archway led into darkness. The dripping came from beyond. He took the candle and moved closer. The passage beyond was smaller, forcing him to stoop. The walls were slick, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. The drip became louder, echoing like footsteps. When he reached the end, he found another door wooden, bound with iron. its surface scarred by time. Symbols were burned into it, crude and dark. He hesitated, then pressed his shoulder against the wood. The door creaked open. A corridor stretched ahead, lined with alcoves. In each alcove lay a figure, motionless, armored, hands folded across their chests. Old knights, long gone to dust, resting in silence. Their armor was tarnished, their faces hidden by helmets. Cobwebs hung like veils from their visors. Roland moved among them, candlelight glinting on faded steel. One by one, the names on the tombs became visible, some familiar from the castle's records, others lost entirely to history. And then, halfway through the hall, he stopped. A suit of armor, unlike the rest polished, gleaming faintly in the candlelight, untouched by decay. Across the breastplate, the same sigil, the blackthorn. At its feet, a plaque read, "The Watcher of the Night." Roland knelt, studying the armor. It looked almost alive, too perfect to belong to the dead. He reached out and brushed the dust from the gauntlet. The metal was warm. A faint vibration passed through the floor. Then, somewhere deeper within the passage, a low hum began like a voice far below, singing without words. The candle flame bent sideways, drawn toward the sound. Roland rose, his eyes narrowing. He followed the hum, deeper still, past the line of resting knights, until the corridor widened again into a great circular chamber. Here the walls glowed faintly blue, as if lit from within. Moisture ran down the stone in thin silver lines, and at the center stood a pool of water, still mute. He knelt beside it. The water reflected not his face, but the chapel above the altar, the torn tapestry, the moonlight streaming through stained glass. As he leaned closer, the reflection changed. Now he saw men standing behind him, knights, in full armor, silent, unmoving. He turned sharply. The chamber was empty. But when he looked again, the reflection remained. The hum became words, now soft, rhythmic, almost gentle. He couldn't understand the language, but its cadence felt familiar, like a lullaby from long ago. Then the surface of the water rippled. A hand emerged, pale armored, rising from beneath the reflection. Roland didn't move. The hand reached toward him, not with threat, but with invitation. He placed his palm against the water. Cold met warmth, stone met life. And for a moment he saw the knights of the Brotherhood of the Night watch riding through storms, guarding castles, keeping vigil through centuries of silence. He saw their burdens, their vows, their loneliness. He saw the keeper in his youth, standing before the same pool, swearing an oath that bound him to this place forever. And then the vision faded. The pool grew still again. Only his reflection remained. When Roland finally turned back toward the stairway, the whisper followed him, soft and distant now, fading like breath on glass. At the chamber door, he paused. The candle burned low, its light thin and uncertain. Before he left, he looked once more at the armor marked "The Watcher of the Night." For just a heartbeat, the visor moved. A sigh escaped from within, quiet, weary, almost human. Roland bowed his head. "Rest easy, brothers," he whispered. "Your watch continues." Then he climbed the stair, leaving the depths behind. The door closed slowly, sealing the darkness once more. And far below, in the silence that followed, the hum began again, soft, endless, eternal. The first rays of dawn touched the castle towers like pale gold, glimmering across the mist that hovered over the courtyard. The night's chill still lingered, threading through the narrow corridors and over the stones that had whispered so many secrets. Sir Roland had returned from the depths before sunrise. His boots were wet with the moisture of the lower halls, his mind filled with images that refused to fade, reflections that were not his own. The warmth of dead armor, the haunting hum of voices long gone. He walked slowly through the great hall. The fire from the night before had gone cold. Only thin trails of smoke curled upward, fading into the beams above. At the far end of the hall, the keeper was already awake. He stood by the tall window, motionless, his hands folded behind his back. The morning light painted him in soft gold and gray. When he turned, his eyes were calm to calm, like a man who had seen the same dawn for centuries. "You went below," the keeper said quietly. It was not a question. Roland hesitated. "Yes." The old man nodded slowly. "Few ever do." He gestured toward a long wooden bench near the hearth. "Sit." Roland obeyed, though the tension in his chest felt heavy, like armor that refused to loosen. The keeper poured him a cup of thin, dark wine, a morning custom from long before the castle's prime. As the cup was passed, the keeper's hand trembled, though his voice remained steady. "You saw them," he said. "The watchers beneath." Roland nodded. "They still exist, in some way." The keeper looked toward the window again. "They do, because this place remembers. The stones hold the breath of those who served within them. Every vow, every sorrow, every final whisper. The castle keeps them." He turned back. "And so do I." Roland studied him. The keeper seemed older than the castle itself, his face weathered by time, his eyes carrying a stillness no mortal life could hold. "You speak as if you were one of them," Roland said softly. A faint smile touched the old man's lips. "Perhaps I was. Perhaps I still am." He walked to the wall and drew aside a tapestry that hung there, revealing a small wooden door behind it. "This castle was built upon another," he continued. "Older, stronger, forgotten by most. Its first builders believed that stone could bind not only walls, but souls. They raised this place as a sanctuary and a prison." He motioned for Roland to follow. The door led to a narrow stair, spiraling upward this time, winding through beams of golden light that filtered in through thin slits in the wall. Dust sparkled in the air like drifting stars. As they climbed, the keeper spoke again. When the first brotherhood was formed, their task was not war, it was remembrance. They watched the night so others might dream in peace. They carried the weight of centuries so others could forget. Roland's hand brushed the rough stone as he followed. "And you, I am the last," the keeper said simply. They emerged into a circular tower chamber, smaller than the great hall, but filled with books, scrolls, and relics. Candles burned low on every surface. At the center stood a pedestal, and upon it a small iron box, sealed with wax. "This is the heart of the castle," the keeper said. "What it protects is not gold or relics. It is memory." He opened the box. Inside was a single feather-white, long, faintly glowing in the candlelight. Roland leaned closer. "What is it?" The keeper's voice was almost a whisper, a fragment of light, a promise kept for 1,000 years, the last vow of the first watcher. He lifted it gently, and for a moment the air around them seemed to warm. The hum from below rose again soft, echoing through the stones. Roland felt a pulse through the floor, like a heartbeat answering another. "When the last keeper's strength fades," the old man continued, "the next is chosen, not by words or ritual, but by the castle itself." Roland frowned. Chosen. The keeper looked at him, and in his eyes Roland saw it the same blue glow he had glimpsed in the passage below. Yes, the keeper said. You felt it last night, didn't you? The warmth in the stone, the calling. Roland's breath caught, the memory of the humming chamber, the reflection in the water, the armored hand reaching toward him, all of it returned. You want me to replace you, Roland said. The keeper shook his head gently. It is not want, it is the way of things. Every age has its watcher. Every stone must remember. Silence filled the room. Outside, the dawn grew brighter. The sound of crows echoed faintly across the battlements. Roland stared at the feather. And if I refuse, the keeper smiled sadly, then the walls will crumble, and the voices will fade. The memories will scatter like dust in the wind, and history, true history, will be forgotten. He placed the feather back in the box and closed the lid. Forgetting, he murmured, is the first death of all things. The keeper turned away, walking toward the window again. The light washed over him, and for a brief instant, Roland thought he saw through him the faint outline of armor beneath the robes, a flicker of something not entirely human. When he blinked, the image was gone. The old man looked back once more, his expression calm. Rest now, he said softly. The day will be long, and the night longer still. Roland bowed his head, his thoughts a storm of silence. As he descended the stair, the hum beneath the castle rose faintly, once more gentle, patient, eternal. And in the tower above, the keeper stood motionless, the morning light shimmering through him like smoke. Night came softly, like a tide rolling over the cliffs. The sea stretched wide and black beneath the lighthouse, and the wind moved through the tower with the voice of something half alive. Inside, Roland sat near the small hearth, the same wooden chair that creaked as the keeper once leaned upon it. The logs burned slow, their light painting restless shapes across the stone walls. Every sound felt amplified, the distant crash of waves, the sigh of wind beneath the door, the steady beat of his own heart. He told himself it was only exhaustion, that the strange warmth he had felt since morning was nothing more than fever or lack of sleep. But as the hour deepened, the silence began to move. It started faintly, a sound too soft to be a voice, too deliberate to be the wind. A hum, low and rhythmic, as if the walls were breathing. Roland leaned forward. The sound seemed to come from the stones themselves, vibrating through the mortar like a heartbeat buried in earth. He rose and pressed his hand against the wall. The chill of the stone seeped into his skin, yet beneath it, unmistakably, there was warmth. And then words. At first, he thought he was dreaming. The whisper was so faint, he could not tell whether it came from the walls or from within his mind. Do you hear us? Roland froze. The words dissolved into the crackle of the fire, and he waited, breath held. Moments passed, only the sea answered, rumbling far below. Then again, closer this time, as if the stones leaned inward. We remember you. The voice was neither male nor female. It sounded aged, patient, almost kind. Roland whispered back, his throat dry. Who are you? No answer. Only the wind, sweeping through the old iron vents. He turned toward the stairwell. The shadows seemed deeper tonight. The light of his lamp caught tiny specks of dust drifting like pale ghosts. As he climbed, the whispers followed, not loud, but constant, a soft weaving of syllables, like prayers in a forgotten tongue. At the landing, he stopped before the keeper's door. The chamber smelled faintly of salt and candle wax. The books on the shelf were untouched, yet a few pages trembled as if stirred by unseen hands. He reached for the old journal lying open on the table. Lines of careful handwriting filled the page, but the last entry stopped abruptly. The walls have begun to wake. They call not to me, but to another. Roland's pulse quickened. He turned the page. The next sheet was blank, except for a faint impression. Words pressed so lightly they seemed carved by memory itself. Do not fear the whispers. They remember what you forget. He closed the book slowly. Outside, thunder rolled across the sea. A storm was forming on the horizon. Black clouds crawling over the moon. Lightning flashed, turning the tower white for an instant. And in that brightness, he saw it. A figure at the far end of the hallway, tall, cloaked, unmoving. The next flash of light showed only emptiness. Roland stepped forward, the whispering growing louder now, rising and falling like breath. The walls seemed to pulse with each step, alive, aware. He reached the end of the corridor where the figure had stood. There was only a small alcove, once used for storage. A single candle sat there, unlit, yet its wick smoldered faintly as if it remembered flame. He touched the wax, warm. The storm struck then, wind hammering the windows, rain pelting the roof. The tower shook with the weight of the sea's fury. Roland hurried to the observation room, where glass panes framed the endless dark. Waves rose like mountains. Thunder rolled again and again, and through it all the whispers continued. Now they were not one, but many, layered voices, weaving through the howl of the storm. Remember the light. Keep watch until the end. Do not let the sea take the name. Roland pressed his hands to his ears. The sound wasn't outside. It was within the stone, within him. Lightning flashed again. For an instant, he saw the reflection of a man in the glass, not his own face, but the keeper's, standing just behind him. Roland spun around. Nothing. Only the whisper of waves. Hours passed. The storm began to fade. Exhausted, Roland sank to the floor beside the great lens of the lighthouse. The last ember of the fire below had gone out, and darkness thickened around him. He could hear the whispering still, but it had softened, now more like a lullaby than a warning. He let his eyes close. In the half-dream that followed, he stood upon the battlements of a castle, not the lighthouse, but the ancient fortress from his visions. The walls there breathed as well, sighing with centuries of memory. A voice spoke near his ear, clearer than ever before. You cannot keep the light without hearing its song. He turned, and there, in the moonlight, stood the keeper, robes fluttering in the unseen wind. The walls whisper to guide you, the old man said. Listen too closely, and you'll forget your own voice. Ignore them, and you'll forget ours. The dream dissolved like mist. When Roland awoke, dawn had come. The sea was calm again. He rose unsteadily and touched the wall beside him. It was silent now, cold and still. But beneath his palm, faintly, was a pulse. The whisper returned once more, softer than breath. We are not done. The morning light felt different that day. Not bright, not cheerful, but gentle, like an echo of something older. It spilled through the narrow window of the lighthouse chamber, coating the dust in a thin shimmer of gold. Roland stood at the table where the keeper's old belongings still lay untouched. The brass compass, the cracked hourglass, the faded maps of coastlines that no longer existed. And then there was the box. The same iron box the keeper had once opened before him, the one that contained the glowing feather. For hours, Roland had avoided looking at it, but now it seemed to call to him. He lifted the lid slowly. The feather still glowed faintly, though the light within it had dimmed. Around it lay a ring of fine sand, grains that seemed to move slightly, as if stirred by breath. As Roland leaned closer, he heard it again. That faint hum, not from the walls this time, but from the feather itself. He touched it gently, and the room around him dissolved. He stood in darkness. Yet it was not emptiness. There was the sound of the sea again, far away, endless, and the murmur of voices, distant but near. Then light flared ahead, a single lantern hanging in the black. He walked toward it. Each step felt like moving through water, soundless and slow. As he neared, the lantern brightened, revealing the outline of a figure, cloaked, unmoving, holding the light high. "Who are you?" Roland asked, though his voice seemed to echo without reaching the figure. The lantern tilted, and the light fell across a familiar face. It was the keeper, but not as Roland had known him, younger, eyes sharp, robes unstained by time. "You've touched the memory," the keeper's voice said. "Now it remembers you." The lantern's flame flickered, and in its reflection Roland saw scenes unfold: the castle, the tower, the sea, the passageways where shadows whispered. "What is this place?" he whispered. "The lantern of memory," the keeper said. "It burns for all who once watched. Every keeper leaves behind a light, every memory a spark. You stand where they all still burn." Roland looked around. Now he could see them, hundreds of lanterns, each suspended in the air, stretching into the dark like stars. Each one flickered with its own soft rhythm, some dim, some bright, each alive with a faint whispering hum. "They're all here," the keeper said. "Those who held the light before you. They keep the watch, even after their hands have faded." Roland stepped closer to one of the lanterns. Inside, faint images moved: faces, seas, towers collapsing and rising again, lives lived and forgotten. He felt an ache in his chest, as though the memories belonged to him too. "Why show me this?" he asked. "Because the light is fading," the keeper replied. "You must remember what we have forgotten." He extended his hand, and the feather appeared again, now glowing brighter, burning with soft white fire. "This is no bird's feather," he said. "It is a fragment of the first light that ever guided man across the sea. It was given to us to keep alive, to remind the world that memory is stronger than death." Roland stared at the feather. The light within it pulsed, slow and steady, like a heart. "But why me?" the keeper smiled faintly. "Because you still listen." The lanterns began to flicker faster, the light weaving together until the air shimmered. Roland felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The whispers returned, louder now, but harmonious, like 1,000 gentle voices speaking as one. "Keep the light, keeper. Hold the memory. Do not let the night forget." Roland closed his eyes, overwhelmed. The hum turned to a deep, resonant tone, a vibration that seemed to pass through his chest and into the stone of the lighthouse itself. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, silence. He opened his eyes. He was back in the chamber. The feather lay on the table once more, dim but steady. The sea outside was calm again, the horizon pale with dawn. But something had changed. The air felt alive, the walls faintly breathing, and on the floor beside the box lay something new, a small brass lantern, identical to those he had seen in the vision. It was cold at first touch, but as he held it, a faint light bloomed inside, not from flame, but from memory. The walls whispered softly, "The keeper's light must never die." Roland placed the lantern upon the windowsill, facing the sea. He did not know how long he stood there, only that the sound of the waves seemed slower, softer, as though time itself had chosen to rest. For the first time, he did not feel alone. Down below, deep within the stone, another light flickered to life, unseen, forgotten by all but the walls themselves. The lighthouse breathed, the seaside, and the world turned once more beneath an endless sky. The day began with silence, a silence so complete that even the waves seemed to hold their breath. Roland stood at the edge of the tower balcony, gazing across the endless horizon. The air was thick, heavy with a strange stillness that precedes something vast, something ancient. Far in the distance, clouds were gathering, not the usual drifting gray, but towering, blackened spires rising from the sea like mountains of smoke. The water darkened beneath them. Gulls that had wheeled overhead all morning vanished without sound. The sea was changing its mood, and the walls of the lighthouse, old as the kingdom itself, began to groan. Roland turned back toward the chamber, his cloak caught by the wind that had suddenly come alive. The brass lantern on the windowsill flickered weakly, its glow trembling. He remembered the keeper's warning: when the light begins to fade, so too does the memory that guards it. By dusk, the sky was a roiling mass of thunder. The storm had arrived. Waves slammed against the cliffs below, sending white spray bursting upward like shattered glass. The air was electric, the scent of salt and rain heavy on the tongue. Roland descended the winding stairwell, the light from his lantern slicing through the dark. Each step echoed as if the tower itself were counting them. Down in the main chamber, the great lamp that crowned the lighthouse flickered uncertainly. Its gears creaked, and the mirror that cast its beam out to sea trembled under the strain of the wind. He braced himself against the railing, staring into the storm. Beyond the cliffs, he could just make out the faint shape of a ship, struggling, tossing in the furious sea, its mast snapping like brittle bone. Instinct took over. He ran to the mechanism, winding the great crank that fed oil into the burner. The light surged briefly, cutting through the darkness, but the storm roared louder, and thunder rolled over the sea like the growl of some ancient beast. Lightning split the sky. For a heartbeat, the world turned white, and Roland saw faces, dozens of them pressed against the glass of the lighthouse lamp. Pale, shimmering, half-formed, they were the keepers, the ones who had come before him. Their eyes glowed faintly, their mouths unmoving, yet he could hear their voices inside his head. "Hold the light, keeper. Do not let the flame die." He turned the crank harder. The beam stretched farther across the water, sweeping the chaos like a searching eye. But the storm fought back. A deafening crash, and the upper lens cracked, scattering shards of glass across the floor. The lamp sputtered. Roland fell to his knees, clutching the lantern he'd carried from his chamber. The small flame inside flickered wildly, threatening to go out. "No," he whispered. "Not now." He cupped his hands around it. The wind screamed through the broken glass, snuffing torches, tearing fabric, shaking the very bones of the tower. And then, through the howl of the storm, came another sound, a deep, rhythmic pulse. Not thunder, not the sea. It was coming from beneath the lighthouse. Roland froze, heart hammering. The floor beneath him shuddered, as if something vast was moving within the stone. He remembered the tunnels below, the ancient passages carved before even the first keeper had taken watch, the feather, the memory, the whispering walls. Could the storm have awakened something older than all of them? He grabbed his cloak and the small lantern, and descended into the depths. The stairwell spiraled endlessly downward, the air thick with the scent of damp stone. Water trickled down the walls in thin, shining streams. Each step seemed to echo twice, once in his ears, once inside his chest. At the bottom lay a sealed door of iron. It was old, rusted, engraved with the same sigil as the medallion Hede once found, a single flame surrounded by waves. The pulsing sound came from behind it. He placed his hand on the door. It was warm. The metal shifted under his touch, the sigil glowing faintly. Slowly, the door opened inward, revealing a chamber bathed in blue light. Inside, a pool of water lay at the center, perfectly still despite the chaos above. Around it, carved into the walls, were hundreds of small alcoves, each holding a lantern, each flickering faintly, as though breathing. The whispering lights. The voices surrounded him again, calm now, steady. The storm remembers. It is not to destroy, but to remind. All light must face the dark before it endures. Roland approached the pool. The reflection of his lantern rippled across the surface, merging with the glow beneath. In the water, he saw not himself, but the keeper, standing once more in that endless void of memory. "Do you see now?" the keeper's voice asked softly. "The storm comes to renew. It tears away what has grown brittle, to make way for what endures." Roland knelt beside the pool. The lighthouse groaned above, but down here the air was peaceful. He understood. He raised his lantern and let a single drop of its glowing light fall into the water. The pool flared brightly, white, gold, then soft silver. The trembling of the earth ceased. The roar of the storm began to fade. Above, the shattered lamp blazed to life again, brighter than before, cutting through the night like a new dawn. The ship found its way. When Roland climbed back to the top, the storm had passed. The sea lay calm once more, and the first hints of morning colored the clouds. He set the brass lantern beside the great beam, its gentle glow now steady and strong. The light had survived, and though the keeper's voice was gone, Roland felt his presence, not as a whisper this time, but as warmth in the wind, as calm in the sea. He had learned the storm's truth. Even the fiercest night can serve the light. The morning after the storm dawned in silence. The sea stretched endlessly, soft, silver, breathing like a great sleeping creature. Mist curled around the cliffs, wrapping the lighthouse in a pale veil. Roland stood on the balcony, the cool air touching his face. His hands still trembled faintly, though the storm had passed hours ago. The sea was calm now, unnaturally calm, as if exhausted from its fury. Below, broken pieces of driftwood floated among the waves, and far out, the faint outline of a ship glided away toward the horizon. The same ship he had seen struggling through the storm. It had survived. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the night lifting. Yet something within him remained unsettled, not fear, but curiosity, because in the depths of the lighthouse, behind that iron door, he had seen something impossible. Hundreds of small lanterns glowing in silence, whispering truths older than any man. And in that pool of light, he had glimpsed a reflection, not of himself, but of the first keeper. That day, Roland began searching the tower for answers. He lit every lamp, opened every chest, and carefully examined each shelf of weathered journals left behind by generations of keepers. Most were damp, the ink faded by time, but one, bound in dark leather and sealed with the same sigil as the iron door, remained intact. On its cover, etched in delicate letters, was a single phrase: "The light remembers." Inside were entries written in a hand both elegant and trembling. Year of the endless tides. We came to the cliffs with nothing but fire and faith. The sea had taken everything: homes, voices, hope. We built the tower not to defy it, but to honor it. For every storm hides memory, and every wave carries a name. Roland traced the letters with his fingers. The words felt alive. Further in the pages, he found sketches of the tower's foundation, a spiral carved into the rock, leading down to the same chamber he had entered. The design was ancient, impossibly old, and at the very end of the book, he found a passage that chilled him. The first keeper was not chosen by men, but by the sea itself. When the light was first lit, it asked for one promise: "The keeper shall never leave the tower, for as long as the light endures." Roland looked up from the page. The morning sun glowed faintly through the mist, casting soft beams across the chamber. Dust danced in the air like golden motes. Had he, unknowingly, made the same vow? That night, Roland lit the great lamp again. The lens had been repaired as best as he could manage, its fractured edges catching the light in strange prismatic patterns. The beams swept across the dark water, steady and slow. As the world grew quiet, he climbed once more to the highest balcony. The ocean stretched beneath him, infinite and unknowable. He spoke softly, as if to the sea itself. "If the first keeper was bound here, then why me? Why now?" The waves answered only with whispers. Then faintly, a new sound, a voice deep and distant, rising with the tide. "Because the light remembers every soul who tended it, and it calls again when darkness grows near." Roland's breath caught. He looked out, but the horizon was empty. Yet he felt it, a warmth spreading from the medallion at his neck, the same one he'd found buried in the sand weeks before. He held it up to the moonlight. The sigil gleamed faintly, the same flame and waves. But now, around it, new lines had appeared, threads of silver etching themselves as he watched, forming a spiral like the one carved beneath the tower. The medallion pulsed once, softly, and then the light in the tower flickered in response. He descended to the lower chamber again, heart racing not from fear, but from a strange sense of recognition, as though the walls themselves awaited him. The pool of light still glowed gently, its surface smooth as glass. This time, he knelt and placed the medallion on the edge. The water rippled, and slowly an image began to form. Not a reflection, but a memory. He saw a vast shore under a storm-dark sky, men and women huddled around a single flame, holding it against the wind. They spoke an oath together: "When all else fades, the light shall remain, and those who keep it shall belong to the sea." The image shifted. The first keeper, a figure cloaked in salt-stained robes, lifted the flame and set it within a glass tower. The moment the light touched the glass, the storm vanished, and calm spread across the waters. Then the keeper turned, and Roland saw his face clearly. It was his own. He stumbled back, the image dissolving into ripples. His breath came in shallow bursts. Was it a vision, a dream, or something older, repeating itself through time? He heard the voice again, softer now, no longer from the sea, but from within. "You are not the first, nor the last. The keeper is the memory of the light itself. When one life ends, another awakens to the call." Roland sank to his knees, overwhelmed by a strange peace. He understood now. The tower did not bind him as a prisoner. It had chosen him as a guardian, a continuation of something eternal. He looked around the chamber, at the countless small lanterns lining the walls, each one glowing faintly, each one a soul that had once kept the flame alive. Their light, their memory, had never truly faded. When he returned to the upper deck, dawn had begun to break. The first light of morning touched the horizon, gentle, golden, endless. He stood before the lamp, steadying its glow, whispering softly to it. I understand now. The light remembers. The sea shimmered below, calm as glass. The gulls returned, circling lazily in the sunlight. And for the first time since arriving, Roland felt no weight, only belonging. He turned the medallion in his hand once more. The spiral had stopped glowing, but it was warm, alive. Somewhere far away, another storm would one day rise, and the light would call again. The fog rolled in from the sea before dawn, thick, slow, and silver. By the time the sun should have risen, the world had vanished. The horizon dissolved. Even the gulls fell silent. The lighthouse stood alone, an island of faint amber light within an endless white sea. Roland woke to the muffled toll of the warning bell below the cliffs. He had not rung it. He wrapped his coat around him and climbed down the narrow spiral stairs, the air cold enough to sting his lungs. Outside, waves brushed the rocks like breath through glass. Then he saw them, three dark shapes moving through the fog on a small boat, their oars barely touching the water. The vessel glided soundlessly toward the dock as if drawn by the lighthouse itself. When the prow touched the stone, the figures stood still. They wore long, sea-worn cloaks, their faces hidden by hoods. None spoke. Roland hesitated. No one had come here in months. Finally, he called out, his voice swallowed by mist. Who are you? The sea is dangerous today. The tallest of them lifted a lantern. Its flame burned pale blue. A woman's voice, calm and low, answered. We followed the light. He guided them inside, where warmth returned in soft flickers from the fire. They moved slowly, reverently, their eyes wandering over the walls, as if recognizing an old cathedral. The woman lowered her hood-gray hair, eyes like weathered stone. You keep it well, she said. Few do, these days. Roland poured them tea, still uncertain. I didn't know anyone remembered this place. The woman smiled faintly. The sea remembers everything. We listen to it. Another of the travelers, a younger man with salt-streaked hair, placed something on the table, a piece of glass, curved and etched with the same spiral that marked Roland's medallion. This broke loose from the great lamp weeks ago, he said. We found it drifting north. That's how we knew the keeper had awakened again. Roland's pulse quickened again. He looked down at the shard. Its surface shimmered faintly, as if echoing the rhythm of his heartbeat. As the day faded, they told him stories between long pauses of silence. There were others like them. They said sailors, wanderers, historians who followed the hidden network of ancient lighthouses scattered across forgotten coasts. Each tower was older than any kingdom, each tended by a different keeper through the ages. And every keeper vanished when the light no longer needed them. Roland listened, half lost in the fire's slow crackle. He wanted to ask what became of those keepers, whether they died or simply became light. But he did not speak. Some answers are too still to disturb. Finally, the woman rose. May we see the lamp? He hesitated, then nodded. They climbed the winding stair, their footsteps soft on the stone. The fog pressed against the glass dome like a living thing. Inside the lens chamber, The great lamp burned steady, its golden beam slicing through the white sea beyond. The woman approached it with reverence. "Every keeper leaves a note within the flame," she whispered, "a memory. Sometimes the light lets us read it." She motioned to Roland. "Will you let it speak?" He stepped forward and placed his hand upon the metal frame. The heat pulsed gently through his skin, not painful, warm, human, alive. The medallion at his chest began to glow faintly, answering the light. Then the chamber filled with a low hum, a chorus of distant voices, overlapping like echoes in a cave. Words formed within the hum, soft as breath. "The sea keeps what we give it. The light returns what we forget." The younger man bowed his head. "It's true," he murmured. "The keeper's vow is older than any map." The fog thinned slightly. From the balcony, Roland could see the faint outline of another tower far out to the west, its beam winking through the haze like a heartbeat. "There's another?" he asked. "Yes," the woman said. "And when its light falters, yours strengthens." The towers share one memory, one soul, divided among many watchmen. Roland turned to her. "Then what happens when all the towers go dark?" She looked out at the sea. "Then the world will forget how to find its way home." Her words settled into the silence like ash. When night deepened, Roland offered them rest in the lower quarters, but the travelers refused. "The sea is calm now," said the woman. "It will carry us onward." Before leaving, she handed him a small journal bound in seaweed-tinted leather. "This belonged to the keeper before you," she said. "It should stay with the light." Roland opened it briefly. The pages were blank, except for one line written across the first page. "When you no longer fear the dark, you will hear the light whisper your name." He looked up, but they were already stepping into the fog. Their boat slid away without sound, the blue lantern flickering once, then vanishing entirely. Roland stood at the dock long after they were gone. The waves lapped gently at the stones, glowing faintly with reflections of the lighthouse beam. He returned to the tower, the journal clutched tight in his hands. When he opened it again, inside, a few drops of seawater fell from the binding onto the tableland where they touched. Words began to appear, curling across the page like ink blooming through paper. "Every keeper meets the sea twice, once to arrive and once to remember." The letters faded into stillness. Roland closed the book slowly. Outside, the fog began to thin, revealing a sky scattered with pale stars. The horizon glowed faintly somewhere, far beyond. The western lighthouse shone brighter than before. He breathed out, steady, calm. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. That night, as he drifted into sleep beside the hum of the great lamp, he dreamt not of storms or shadows, but of countless lights shining across the endless ocean, each one tended by quiet hands, each one guiding another soul home. And in the dream, the sea whispered softly, "Keep the flame, keeper, until all the lights remember each other again." Days passed in a quiet rhythm. The storms had ceased, and the sea breathed in long, gentle sighs. Roland's lighthouse glowed every night, its beams sweeping the horizon like a watchful eye. Yet, since the silent visitors had departed, one thought haunted him, still the distant glimmer he'd seen far to the west. Sometimes it flashed once, then vanished for hours. Other nights, it pulsed 3 times in slow succession, as if speaking in some forgotten language. He began marking each pattern carefully in his journal. Perhaps it was coincidence, perhaps weather, but deep down, he felt the truth. Someone was signaling him. Each evening he climbed the spiral stair with a lantern and watched. The great lamp hummed softly, its golden heart steady. Below, waves murmured against the rocks, whispering fragments of sound that almost shaped into words. Then one night, as mist gathered low across the sea, the western light blinked again, 3 long flashes, one short. Roland leaned forward. He waited. Then, guided by instinct, he turned his own lamp lever, dimming and brightening it in reply. 1 long, 3 short, for a heartbeat, nothing. Then, the distant beam shimmered once in response. A conversation had begun. For several nights, they spoke in that slow, wordless rhythm of light. Roland scribbled down each sequence, decoding patterns in the silence between waves. The meaning was uncertain, yet he sensed emotion behind it, warmth, recognition, longing. On the 6th night, the pattern changed. The other light flashed in quick, urgent pulses, and then fell still. Moments later, thunder rolled across the horizon. Roland turned his gaze to the darkening clouds. A storm was coming, but this time, not one born of weather. He hurried to the lower chamber, the medallion at his neck vibrating faintly. When he touched the pool of light, ripples formed, and within them appeared a reflection, not of himself, but of another keeper, standing within a similar tower across the sea. The figure raised a hand in greeting. His face was pale, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. Roland spoke softly, though he knew sound could not cross that distance. "Who are you?" The figure's lips moved. No sound reached him, but the water carried the meaning like a memory. "The western tower is failing. The sea rises higher each tide. If our flame dies, yours will fade with it." Roland felt the chill crawl through him. The network of lights, these ancient beacons, were bound together. If one extinguished, the rest would dim in sorrow. That night, he worked tirelessly to strengthen his beam. He polished every brass fitting, trimmed each wick, and replaced the cracked glass pane that once distorted the light. As he worked, he spoke aloud to the sea, as though the other keeper could somehow hear through the wind. "Hold on, my friend. Your light won't fade. Not while I stand watch." He sent his signal against Teddy, firm, unwavering. Across the black water, the western beam flickered weakly, then steadied in reply. Roland smiled. Good. Days turned into nights, and the exchange continued. He began to learn the rhythm of the other keeper's thoughts, how gratitude felt like 2 quick flashes, and warning came as one drawn pulse. Though they never met, their silent dialogue became a lifeline between worlds. But one evening, as the sun bled crimson into the horizon, the western light did not appear. Roland waited through the dusk, and the night, and the dawn. Nothing. The sea seemed heavier that day. Even the gulls refused to fly near. He descended to the base of the tower, to the pool of light, his heart pounding. "Show me," he whispered. The surface shimmered reluctantly. Through the haze, he saw the western lighthouse half submerged, waves slamming against its walls. The keeper within struggled to keep the flame alive. Roland pressed both palms to the edge of the pool. "Take my light," he said, "if it saves his." The tower shuddered faintly, as if understanding. The great lamp above flared brighter, its beam stretching impossibly far, piercing the storm. Through the vision, he saw the western keeper lift his head and smile weakly. The light in his hands reignited, merging with Roland's glow, until the sea between them glittered like molten gold. Then the image faded. When Roland returned upstairs, the dawn was breaking. The western horizon shimmered faintly, the other light still alive, though dim. He sank into the chair near the window, exhausted but calm. The medallion at his chest was warm, pulsing in rhythm with the faraway beam. For a long time, he simply watched the gentle exchange of light, back and forth, like two heartbeats across the sea. He realized then that the lighthouse was never meant to stand alone. Each tower was a breath in a larger body, a chain of guardians, keeping the world from forgetting its way. He whispered softly to the horizon, "We're still here, and we remember." That evening, as he prepared to rest, a new message blinked faintly from the west. Not distress this time, something else. Two long flashes, one short, one long. Roland opened the journal the silent visitors had given him. On the inside cover, faint writing appeared, glowing just enough to read. "The Western Keeper thanks you. When your time comes, the light will carry your memory forward." Roland smiled faintly. He turned down the wick of the great lamp until only a soft halo remained, enough to guide, not to blind. The sea shimmered silver under the rising moon. Somewhere far beyond, another keeper stood watch, and between them the ocean slept peacefully, dreaming of light. The night began like any other. A hush fell across the sea, and the horizon stretched endlessly, bathed in the faint silver of the moon. Sir Roland tended to his lamp, polishing the last traces of soot from the glass. The flame within danced softly, its light painting warm gold across the stone walls. But something was different tonight. The air felt thicker, charged with an unseen energy. The sound of the waves carried a strange melody, not of wind or tide, but of voices. At first, he thought it was memory. The sea often played tricks after too many sleepless nights. Yet as the hours deepened, the murmurs grew clearer, rising and falling like a choir hidden beneath the surface of the water. He walked out onto the balcony of the lighthouse. The night was still, yet the waves shimmered with faint light threads of pale blue weaving in and out of the current. The whispers followed, soft but distinct, like words spoken in the language of dreams. "Keeper, keeper of the flame." Roland froze. He could hear them now, clearly. Dozens of voices, calling not in fear, but in reverence. "We remember your watch. Do not let the light fade. The sea remembers every keeper who has fallen." The wind rose suddenly, whipping his cloak against his legs. Far off in the distance, clouds gathered, swirling like black smoke over the horizon. Lightning flickered within them, not the sharp white of a storm, but a deep, haunting blue. Roland gripped the railing. A storm was coming, but not of rain or thunder. This was something older, something born of memory itself. He hurried down to the chamber below, where the pool of light rippled restlessly. Its glow was brighter than usual, as if it, too, had heard the voices. When he knelt before it, the reflection that looked back was not his own. Instead, he saw faces, hundreds of them, men and women, wearing the same medallion that hung around his neck. Keepers of ages past. They stood in a vast, endless sea of mist, their forms glowing faintly like embers. "You have kept the flame longer than any before you," one voice said, "but the sea grows restless. It remembers the ages when we failed." Roland's throat tightened. "What does it want?" "It wants to be heard," came the answer. "It carries the weight of every promise broken, every light extinguished too soon." The pool flickered, showing visions, towers collapsing into waves, lamps shattered by storms, keepers dragged beneath the water by the fury of the deep. And yet, amid the ruin, Roland saw other lights, distant towers, still burning, faint but steady. Each keeper holds a fragment of the sea's memory. the voices whispered. But when one light fades, the silence grows louder. Above him, thunder rolled. The entire tower trembled. He climbed the staircase once more, each step echoing like a heartbeat. When he reached the top, the sky had split open, with light blue arcs of lightning weaving like veins across the clouds. The ocean below churned violently, its surface boiling with ghostly glow. From the depths, the voices rose again, hundreds, then thousands, each blending into a vast, sorrowful harmony. Remember us, keep the flame alive. Roland stood before the great lamp. Its flame sputtered, nearly extinguished by the gusting wind. He shielded it with his hands, whispering to the storm, "I remember you. I remember all of you." He poured the last of the oil into the reservoir. The wick flared, golden and bright, defying the storm's rage. The voices grew louder, circling the tower, echoing in the clouds and sea. It felt as though the entire world was holding its breath. Then silence, for a heartbeat, the world stood still. And in that silence, Roland heard a single, gentle whisper, closer than all the rest. "You are not alone." When the wind struck again, it carried rain that glowed faintly like molten silver. Each drop that fell upon the tower shimmered with warmth, not cold. The sea itself seemed to hum in rhythm with the flame above. He looked out, and there, faint but visible, stood dozens of lights along the horizon. Not ships, not lightning, other towers, other keepers. Each one flickered in unison with his own, forming a vast chain of light that curved across the ocean, stretching beyond sight. Roland felt tears burn at his eyes. He whispered to the wind, "We are together." Even in the dark, the storm began to calm. The thunder softened into distant murmurs, and the voices faded into the rhythm of the waves. When dawn finally arrived, the sea was glass smooth, reflecting the pale sky like a mirror. Roland sat beside the lamp, his hands resting on the warm metal frame. The medallion around his neck pulsed faintly, once, twice, then settled into stillness. He understood then what the voices had meant. The sea did not mourn, it remembered, and every keeper who had ever stood watch, every flame that had ever shone in darkness, still lived within the memory of the tide. That night, Roland wrote in his journal, "The sea has a voice, and it speaks not in anger, but in longing. Each wave is a memory, each wind a whisper. I am not guarding against the dark, I am listening to it." He closed the book, placed it beside the lamp, and leaned back in his chair. The horizon glowed faintly in the west where the other keeper's light still burned. As he drifted toward sleep, the ocean outside hummed softly, like a lullaby sung by countless unseen souls. And for the first time in many years, Sir Roland smiled in his dreams. 4 days after the storm, the sea remained strangely calm. Each morning, Sir Roland awoke to the gentle rhythm of the waves brushing the base of the tower. The sky, pale and endless, felt like a curtain that had been drawn back after a long performance. The world was quiet again, but not silent. Beneath the calm, something waited. The whispering storm had left him a single sign. When the rain stopped, a piece of parchment had washed up on the rocks below. It was old, edges frayed, ink almost faded, but across its surface ran a faint sketch of coastlines and dots of light. One mark, drawn larger than the rest, sat far beyond the known waters. Beneath it, a single word was written, Illyria. Roland stared at it for hours, tracing the faint lines with his fingers. He had never heard of Illyria. Yet the moment his eyes touched the name, something deep within him stirred, as if a forgotten memory had been called by that single word. That night, as the stars rose, he made his choice. He filled a small satchel with food, sealed the journal of the lighthouse within waxed cloth, and placed it beside the lamp. Then, with careful hands, he lowered the old rowboat into the glowing tide. The flame still burned high above, keeping its eternal watch as he rowed into the horizon toward the unknown shore. For 2 days, the sea remained kind. The winds were soft, the water smooth, and the only sound was the slow dip of his oars. He slept in brief moments, lulled by the steady motion of the current. Once, in the distance, he thought he saw other lamps flicker faint beacons across the endless ocean, like eyes watching over him. But on the 3rd night, the world began to change. The stars dimmed, one by one, until only the moon remained. The sea beneath him no longer shone blue, but a deep silver gray, heavy and thick as melted glass. The air grew still, and then, just beyond the fog, he saw it, a faint glimmer of land, the forgotten shore. The boat drifted softly onto a narrow beach. Roland stepped onto the sand, which shimmered faintly under his boots. Each grain caught the moonlight, glowing pale like powdered pearl. The air smelled faintly of old wood and rain, as though the island had been waiting for centuries. Ahead of him rose the remains of a tower, not like his own. This one was ancient, half buried in sand and coral. Its stones were carved with symbols of light and tide, the language of the earliest keepers. The lamp at its peak had long gone dark, yet the air around it pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of something sleeping. Roland climbed the worn staircase, his lantern casting slow circles on the wall. Each step echoed back to him, not as a single sound, but as many as though every footfall awakened the memory of those who had walked here before. At the top, he found a platform covered in moss and sea salt. In the center lay a single crystal, cracked and dim, its surface etched with countless tiny runes. He knelt beside it and brushed away the sand. A faint warmth pulsed beneath his fingertips. The heart of Illyria, whispered a voice, not in his ears, but in his mind. The first flame. Roland looked around, but there was no one, only the endless sea, calm and waiting below. He placed his medallion over the crystal. The metal vibrated softly, and a pale thread of light rose from the stone, winding upward like smoke. It hovered before him, then split into countless smaller strands, each one forming an image, a memory. He saw the first lighthouse being built, wooden scaffolds, torches raised against the dark. He saw the earliest keepers, men and women bound not by duty, but by promise, to keep the night from forgetting the dawn. Then came the storms, ages of them, when the sea rose in fury and swallowed half the tower's whole. The voices he'd heard before, the whispers in the waves, were not ghosts, but memories of those who kept the flame through those tempests. And then he saw something else. The crystal pulsed brighter, revealing a shadow deep beneath the ocean, vast, coiling, alive. It was not a creature of malice, but of memory, the sea's own consciousness. It had kept watch even longer than the keepers themselves. The sea remembers, the voice murmured, but it cannot speak except through those who listen. Roland bowed his head. He understood now. The keepers were not guarding the sea from darkness. They were helping it remember the light. The crystal's glow dimmed, returning to a faint shimmer. Roland rose, feeling a deep stillness within him, a sense that he had stepped into the heart of something endless. As he left the tower, dawn began to break. The first rays of sunlight touched the shore, painting the sand in hues of gold and rose. For the first time, he saw color across the island, wildflowers pushing through cracks in stone, the faint green of moss glistening with dew. He turned to the sea. Far on the horizon, he could still see the faint sparkle of his own lighthouse, the flame burning faithfully in the distance. He smiled, whispering to the wind, "You were never forgotten." The sea answered, with a soft wave that brushed the sand at his feet like a gentle nod. He gathered a handful of the glowing sand and placed it in a small pouch. Then he stepped back into his boat, letting the tide pull him home. Behind him, the crystal deep within the ruined tower flickered once, twice, and then burst into gentle light. For a brief moment, the entire horizon shimmered with reflection, as if the sea itself were smiling. That night, back in his own tower, Roland placed the pouch beside the lamp. The flame burned brighter, warmer, and the air filled with the faint scent of salt and rain. He opened his journal and wrote, "The sea has roots in memory. The light we guard is not to fight darkness, but to remind the world that dawn always returns." He closed the book and leaned back, listening to the rhythm of the waves. In their sound, he no longer heard loneliness, only connection. And as sleep began to take him, he thought of the forgotten shore and the gentle truth it had shown him. Even when a light goes out, the memory of its warmth never fades. The waves had changed. Sir Roland could feel it in the way his small boat moved, no longer drifting, but guided. The sea beneath him felt alive, calm, and deeply aware of his presence, as if it recognized him now, not as a keeper of the light, but as part of it. The journey back to the mainland took 3 days. During the first, the sky remained veiled in pale silver clouds. Gulls followed him, gliding in perfect silence. On the second day, a soft wind rose from the south, carrying the faint scent of pine and rain. Roland looked up and saw the first stars appearing, each one reflected perfectly in the glass-like sea. By the third day, dawn arrived with a glow unlike any he had seen before, golden, wide, and warm. It stretched across the horizon in bands of rose and amber. And in that light, he saw home. The lighthouse stood tall, as it always had, waiting like a quiet sentinel on the cliff. Its flame still burned, steady and small, watching over the endless ocean. But something had changed inside Roland. He no longer saw the tower as stone and wood, but as something living, a pulse in the heart of the world. When his boat touched the shore, he felt the sand greet him with warmth. He climbed the familiar path to the tower, each footstep echoing softly in the cool morning air. The gulls wheeled above him, calling once, not with the usual sharp cry of hunger, but a long, drawn-out sound that felt almost like a song. Inside, the air was cool and familiar. The walls, the stairs, the scent of oil and salt, all as he had left them. And yet, beneath it all, there was a vibration, faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing. He placed his hand on the stone, and it answered with a slow, steady hum. The tower was awake. He climbed to the top. The great lamp stood silent, its glass streaked with salt from years of storms. The flame still flickered at its center, the same light he had tended for half his life. But now it seemed small, faint. He reached into his satchel and drew out the pouch of glowing sand he had gathered from the forgotten shore. As he untied the cord, the faint particles drifted upward on their own, like dust caught in sunlight. They hovered around the lamp, shimmering softly, and then settled into the oil like falling stars. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, With a quiet sigh, the flame grew. It did not burst. It bloomed, a gentle unfurling of gold and white light that filled the glass chamber with radiance. The air turned warm, the shadows melted, and the hum of the tower deepened into a steady tone that resonated through the floor. From the cliffs below, fishermen would later say they saw the light swell to 5 times its brightness, not blinding, but peaceful, like dawn breaking underwater. As Roland watched, something extraordinary began to happen. Beyond the sea, far in the distance, other lights began to stir. First one, then another. Tiny sparks appeared along the horizon, lighthouses, long forgotten, thought to have fallen dark ages ago. Each one flickered faintly, as if remembering what it once was. And then, one by one, they awakened a chain of golden eyes across the vast ocean, stretching farther than the human eye could see. The sea itself shimmered, reflecting their light. The world had not been so bright in centuries. Roland felt tears rise to his eyes. He whispered to the night, "You remember," and the sea whispered back through the waves, soft and steady, always. That night, he sat by the window and opened his old journal. The pages were nearly full now, each one covered in delicate lines of ink. The stories of his watch, his solitude, his fears. But tonight, his words came easily, flowing like the tide. The light was never meant to fight the dark. It was meant to remind us that the dawn still belongs to us, that no matter how vast the sea, there is always a horizon. He paused, listening. Outside, the waves rolled gently, like the breathing of something eternal. As the night deepened, he saw faint beams moving across the water, other lighthouses, their lights crossing paths with his. He imagined the other keepers, standing as he did, miles away, watching their flames awaken. Perhaps they too had thought they were alone. Perhaps now, for the first time, they understood they were part of something greater, a living chain of guardians stretching across the edges of the world. And for the first time in years, Roland smiled without sorrow. Sometime before dawn, he drifted into sleep at his desk. When he dreamed, he did not see the tower nor the sea. He saw the faces of those who came before him, the ancient keepers, their hands raised to the stars, each one carrying a small flame. They were not far away now, they were within the light itself. When he awoke, the morning sun had already risen. The lamp still burned, but softer now, like a resting heart. The air was filled with the scent of salt and wildflowers. The first blossoms of spring had opened overnight along the cliffs. Roland stepped outside. The ocean spread before him, quiet and vast. He could still see the faint glow of distant towers, their flames steady, their light traveling miles through the mist. And he knew that his time as keeper was almost done. The world was awake again. The sea remembered. The flame no longer needed only him. It belonged to all who watched over it. He turned toward the horizon, where the light met the sea, and whispered softly, "When I am gone, let the next keeper listen, not to command the flame, but to understand it." The wind carried his words across the water, where they mingled with the sound of waves. That night, for the first time, Roland left the lamp to burn without his tending. He sat outside, beneath the stars, and watched as the light reached higher and higher into the night. It touched the low clouds, turning them gold, then drifted outward like ripples, a beacon for travelers, dreamers, and those who had lost their way. He closed his eyes, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath him, and thought, "The sea keeps its memories, and now so will we. Morning came softly, like a sigh. The sea shimmered with quiet light, the gulls circled slowly above, and Sir Roland awoke to the sound of the waves kissing the rocks below the tower. He had dreamed again, but this time not of storms or distant voices. He dreamed of hands, countless hands, each one holding a small flame. And when he opened his eyes, he knew his time as keeper had reached its final day. He rose carefully, his movements slower now, but steady. The lamp still burned bright above, steady as ever, casting a ribbon of gold across the morning mist. The tower hummed faintly, the same warm sound it had made since his return from the forgotten shore. He smiled, touching the stone. "You've done well, old friend," he murmured, and in the faint breeze that swept through the open window, it almost felt like the tower was breathing with him. At noon, he packed a small wooden chest. Inside, he placed the journal that told the story of the light, every entry, every sketch, every thought he had ever written during his watch. He added the pouch of glowing sand, now dim but still warm, and the medallion of the first keeper. Then he sealed it, wrapped it in cloth, and set it by the door. Outside, the air smelled of salt and blooming heather. The cliffs were bright with flowers, and down the path he saw a small figure approaching, a young woman in a gray cloak, walking carefully up the trail. She carried a satchel, and at her belt hung the simple lantern of an apprentice. Roland waited for her at the threshold. When she reached him, she bowed her head deeply. "Keeper Roland," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I've come from the Northern Watch. They told me you were ready to pass the flame." He studied her face, calm but nervous, eyes bright with that same wonder he had once carried himself. "You're not late," he said with a faint smile. "The sea has its own clock." They climbed the spiral staircase together. The girl's steps echoed, quick and light, while his were slow, deliberate. Halfway up, she glanced through a narrow window at the endless horizon and whispered, "It feels alive." Roland nodded. "It is. Remember that when you stand watch. The sea remembers your voice, even when you think no one hears." At the top, the great lamp awaited them, steady, serene. The girl stood in awe as the light shimmered against the glass, the reflection painting her face in gold. Roland took the medallion from his neck and placed it gently into her hands. "You don't command the flame," he told her. "You accompany it." She nodded, eyes glistening. Then together they opened the lamp's casing. The flame inside seemed to lean toward her, like it recognized the new heartbeat that would tend it. She held out her small lantern, and the flame bridged between them, not a spark, but a breath. When it touched her lantern's wick, the light steadied, glowing bright and calm. The transfer was complete. Outside, the sky began to change. It was late afternoon now. The horizon blushed with soft rose and violet. Across the ocean, other lights began to awaken, the chain of towers glowing one by one as if greeting the new keeper. The girl stood at the window, her hair brushing the golden light, and whispered, "They're all awake again." Roland smiled faintly. "They'll never sleep completely, not now." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Listen to the wind. It carries their names." As dusk fell, the two of them sat outside the tower, sharing silence and tea. The waves below glittered with reflected light, and the air hummed with that deep, eternal stillness that comes only when everything is in its right place. "What will you do now?" the girl asked quietly. Roland looked toward the horizon. The sun had nearly set, but the last rays still shimmered along the water like liquid gold. "I think," he said softly, "I'll follow the light for a while. See where it leads when no one is watching." When night finally came, he rose and walked down to the shore. The sea stretched wide before him, calm and silver under the moon. The young keeper watched from the tower window as he set a small boat into the tide, the same boat that had once carried him to the forgotten shore. He looked back one last time. The tower's lamp burned high above, its beam sweeping slowly across the waves. He raised his hand in silent farewell. The girl lifted her lantern in return, a single point of light answering another. And for a brief moment, their two flames aligned perfectly, reflecting across the sea like twin stars. Then the tide took him. The boat drifted outward, small against the endless water. The last thing she saw before the mist swallowed him was the faint glow of his lantern, fading slowly into the horizon. Weeks passed. The new keeper learned the rhythm of the tower, the tending of the oil, the hum of the glass, the whisper of wind through the stairs. At times, she thought she heard another set of footsteps behind her, soft, reassuring, never threatening. And when the sea grew restless, she would place her hand on the wall and whisper, "He's still here." The tower would hum back, low and steady, as if in agreement. Years later, sailors spoke of a strange sight far beyond the known coasts. They told tales of a wandering light upon the water, a single flame that moved like a star too close to the sea. Some said it was the reflection of the moon. Others said it was the last keeper, still carrying his lantern through the mists, guiding lost ships toward safety. Whatever the truth, no storm ever touched their shores again. Inside the lighthouse, the journal still rested on its shelf. Its final page bore a single line, written in Roland's hand before he departed. "The sea will forget many names, but never the light." That night, as the waves whispered against the cliffs and the lamp burned high above, the young keeper sat alone by the window, listening, breathing, keeping watch. Far off on the horizon, for just a moment, she saw a faint glow, soft, steady, moving slowly east. She smiled and whispered, "Good night, keeper," and the sea, forever awake, answered with a sigh.